In this video, we're going to do a deep dive into everything we know and can extrapolate about the Ford Ranger Super Duty. Why? Because it's the one everyone's talking about, and for good reason. It is in a market segment of one, a class of one, and it could very well be the answer to many recreational four-wheel drivers and many heavy towers' dreams. So let's start with what the Ranger Super Duty actually is. Now, Super Duty has historically meant heavy duty towing usually, but in the case of the Ranger it's actually heavy duty off-road as well as towing and payload. So essentially it's heavy duty Ranger variant. The payload is going to be above 1500 kilograms, which is a lot considering a standard Ranger tops out around about 1000 kilograms. There's a lot of extra payload there. It tows up to 4.5 tons, which is 1000 more than standard, and it's oriented for fleet and heavy duty recreational towers, and it's got some real off-road capabilities which you don't see in any other Ranger with the exception of the Raptor. Now interestingly, there are some features in this vehicle which is actually quite a low base spec. I think it's an RB model Ranger. The current Rangers everyone talks about as next gen are actually RA models, a bit like the PX, that's gone to RA. I think this is an RB, and that's why we're seeing a lot of features which were extra in higher trim models filter through down to the RB model. And the class of one, and it's really, I think for my audience, fleet managers, four-wheel drive tourers and towers, those are the people that need to pay attention to this vehicle. So here's the range. You can get it in all three body styles, the single cab, the extra cab and the dual cab. And if you're looking at the prices going, hang on, I thought it was $80,000. Well, no, that's just Ford marketing doing their job, being very, very clever, because what they have done is quoted the price without a tray, but you have to add some form of tray, and obviously quoted it for the single cab. Now, a lot of people will be looking at the dual cab. You add a tray on, you add the dual cab price, and it's $103,000, which is significantly more than $80,000. We'll get to pricing a bit later on. So yeah, a bit of sleight of hand by Ford marketing, but that is their job. Now you can get it in white and also these four fetching colours. There's no bright orange there or blue, just fairly boring ones. Now the Ranger range is quite extensive. Here they all are, and the Super Duty will not be available in all trim grades. So we know it will come out in XLT grade, and there will be one level underneath that, which is probably going to be a combination of XLS and XL. But again, as I'll show you later on, I think that the base model, let's call it, well, they're going to call it Super Duty, not XL or XLS, but the base model here is actually going to have elements which you see now in sport and certainly XLT, and the XLT one might go a bit further than that, but some of that is speculation. I'll show you what I mean in the photos. Now let's take a look at the capability deltas between the V6 XLT, the one we already know and love, and the Super Duty. I've termed it Poverty Pack, the base one which we've got for the moment. So the first one is payload. Now the V6 will give you 1000 kilograms of payload, which is actually good for its segment, because that also includes a tow bar which is built in as well, and Ford are accurate with their weight. See my other videos for that, so we can trust it. However, that sort of pales into insignificance next to the Super Duty, which offers 1600 kilograms. Now I've had to estimate this because we don't have exact weights for anything other than the cab chassis. We don't know the weight of the tray you see on the back here, and if you go for a tub, then I don't know the weight of that, but I think it'd be in the order of 1600 kilograms, which will be more. Now GVM you up there, that's a GVM upgrade, so even if you GVM upgraded your Ranger, you still wouldn't get close to a Super Duty. Then towing, now 3.5 tons, that's what we all know. I don't recommend you ever tow 3.5 tons with a Ranger in a caravan at least. I'd look for more like about 2800, and again, for reasons I'll get onto, I wouldn't be towing a 4.5 ton caravan with the Super Duty. I'd probably top it out at maybe 3500 or even less. Now off-road, the standard Ranger is good. The Super Duty will be better. The reason is it's going to have a front differential lock, it's going to have taller tyres, and it will have a slightly better wading depth, and it will have a built-in snorkel. Now this is not to, so here's a very clear advantage on payload and towing off-road. Yes, it'll be better, but not dramatically better is my guess. And acceleration, I'll go through this in a moment, but the Super Duty is going to be slower than the standard V6, and by a reasonable margin, I expect as well. Trim levels, if you want a wild track Super Duty, I don't think you'll be able to get one. There's only 2 trim levels for the moment. Obviously you can in the Ranger here. AdBlue, V6 Rangers at the moment don't have AdBlue. Hey, that's great. It is going to be on the Super Duty. Fuel consumption definitely going to be lower here because it's a lighter vehicle, and it doesn't have draggy stuff like the snorkel and the tyres and the lift and everything else. So higher. My guess is probably maybe around 25%, and the engine tune will also play a big factor in that as well. So the main reasons to buy the Super Duty is payload, towing, and to some extent off-road capability, plus out-of-the-box features, which we'll get onto shortly. Now here are some other features. So again, in the high-spec ranges at the moment, they tend to have the 12-inch screen. Well, this has got the 12-inch screen even in the most basic version. It's got 360 cameras and all of the ADAS, advanced driver assistance stuff as well, right in the base version. So again, I think this is an RB Ranger versus an RA Ranger thing. It's got trailer backup assistance. Again, you don't get that standard in XLT, and it's got rock crawl. That's been reserved for the higher spec ones as well, but here it is in the Super Duty. So despite the fact it's a base spec, you're actually getting a bit of fruit which you'd normally get in higher spec Rangers. Now those features are all available in current Rangers. Here are the features which are unique to the Super Duty. Scales, as you can see here in the back of the car, it looks like it can weigh itself, which is quite handy. A manual DPF burn, that's a diesel particulate filter, so the car just won't choose when to do it. You can decide when to do it and have some control over that. Toyota have had that feature in the LC70, for example. A smart hitch, I don't know too much about that, but it's got a TBM management system there, and it's got taller mirrors. I'll show you a photograph there, but they're not towing mirrors, so they're really a compliance thing, not a huge amount of use otherwise. Now here's the scales. As you can see there, it looks to me like it just kind of weighs what's in the back, maybe the front or maybe all of it, I just don't know. And here's the mirrors, so you can see the mirrors here are taller than the standard vehicle, but again, they're not towing mirrors. Ford are not very keen on towing mirrors when they're towing wide trailers for some unknown reason, but you can get clear views as a factory approved option fitted to your car. Now there is also a device holder, goes up to 4 kilograms, and here we see it in action, and there's an extra cutout here where you can bolt it in, so that's going to be really handy for recreational people as well. That's going to be great. And if I spy over here, I can actually see the coffee cup holder, which I had to add to my own XLT, and the extra glove box. Again, that's not standard on current XLTs, but this is presumably the base model. So again, you're starting to see that equipment come through. And then there's a sealed snorkel. Now we shouldn't have to say sealed snorkel, because a snorkel should by definition be sealed. The only way air should be able to get into the engine should be through the top of the snorkel, but a lot of manufacturers put out something what is called an RAI, or raised air intake, which isn't sealed, and so water could get in through areas around here and it's not fully waterproof, and therefore what's the point? So I think it's great that Ford have worked with Safari, who make the best snorkels in the world, to develop this snorkel for the Super Duty and make it standard. So I think that's a big tick, and snorkels is a cheap insurance for your engine, so great to see that this has one. Now the wheels are heavy duty wheels. The base grade will have steel wheels. The XLT will have alloy wheels, which will be lighter, so that will help certainly with fuel consumption and give you a little bit of payload back as well, or that will be eaten away by the XLT's extra equipment. They are 8 studs, so 8 nuts to do and undo, which means that all of you people wanting to bling up your Ranger with aftermarket wheels, well, you're not going to be able to fit any of those existing aftermarket wheels to this, because they simply don't have the right number of studs or the right PCD. Now let's do a cost comparison between the V6 and the Super Duty. So if we were to take a V6 and say, okay, let's build it up, a GVM upgrade might cost you $5,000, which would include replacing all the suspension, right? You wouldn't need to do that for the Super Duty. Then if we add 33-inch all-terrain tyres, maybe $2,500 for that, again, included with the Super Duty. Snorkel, $800, yep. You guessed it, included in the Super Duty. Front locker, $1,800 or thereabouts, that ARB one, included in the Super Duty, but you would get the air compressor on it. And by the way, you couldn't go any legally greater diameter than 33-inch tyres. With the Super GT, because it starts at 33-inch, you could go to 35s. 130 litre long range tank might cost you $1,700. It's included with the Super GT. However, remember, the Super GT is going to use more fuel, so it is going to need more of that tank equivalently. However, by the time you finish modding your V6, it will also increase your fuel consumption as well. Bash plates 1100 included in the Super GT, so you might be looking at maybe $13,000 all up to get what the Super GT comes with. Now, it could be a bit more, could be a bit less. Chances are, if you went to an accessory shop and asked, you'd get a bulk deal. Now, the drive-away price for a V6 XLT is $75,000, where it's $103,000 for, and that's for the base model, not for the XLT. And it doesn't include the tub. So that means that there's a delta of $15,000 to $20,000, which is quite a bit of money. And then once you've done that, you haven't got yourself a Super Duty, but you've got yourself quite a bit of the way there with some pros and cons. So that actually is an option. Now, some things to remember: if you took $13,000 into a four-wheel drive accessory shop, you would definitely get some form of discount, if only because the labour requirement would actually decrease when you're doing all of this work and more on at the same point. So there's that. The second point is that you may not need all of the off-road mods. You might say, look, actually I don't need a front locker. The Ford Ranger, very, very capable vehicle, even without a front locker. So you're not going to get that. And you could say, look, I'm actually happy with the plates underneath it. I don't need extra bash plates on there, and whatever the case may be. So you don't need to, I'm kind of maxed it out with this number here. And then all the Super GT mods are warranted. We're going to talk about that, and that's just a huge deal, right? None of these mods are warranted by Ford, although if you get the ARB equivalent out of the dealer, then they should be. But here, it's all just built in, and I think that's a huge draw card for many people and should not be overlooked. So you could actually buy a lower spec vehicle. You could get the 2-litre bi-turbo, it's only 2-wheel drive, etc., and that would reduce this drive-away price even further. But I've gone for the V6 because it's roughly the same engine, and of course it's got the all-wheel drive. But regardless, if you're trying to do things on a budget, then the Super Duty is not the way to do it. Now let's talk about mods and warranty. So Ford's statement at the PHEV Ranger launch I went to, and this is paraphrasing, essentially said modifications do not affect warranty unless the part caused a failure. And that's my paraphrasing of what the executive said. So some things to know about warranty. The first thing is that even unmodified vehicles can have their claims knocked back. I've seen that quite a bit. I'm sure everyone else has seen it as well. Warranty, it's a claim, right? It's not necessarily going to be agreed just because you think you're in the right, whether you should be or shouldn't be, right? So having something technically covered under warranty is not a guarantee. It actually will be. Now, caused or contributed to up here is a bit of a grey area. So let's say that you put a suspension lift in your vehicle and the aircon fails, right? There's no correlation there. Be very hard to argue that the suspension lift caused the air conditioning to fail. But if the CV joint failed, where you could argue that it's now at a different angle or there's greater weight in it or whatever, and that could be argued. So whenever you modify a vehicle, you are definitely taking a risk, and you are mitigating that risk with the Super Duty now. So the modification risk kind of goes away because Ford are giving you the vehicle as is, and it's all very nicely integrated. You're not going to get tail shaft vibrations from a lift, for example. Now, let's talk about the V6 XLT versus the Super Duty and power and torque specifically. I just want to delve into this for a little bit. Now, here's the figures for the V6. I know how much it weighs because I've got one and I weighed it myself. 12.7 kilograms per kilowatt, 3.8 kilograms per Newton meter. Now, if we take a look at the Super Duty, it's down on power because they've detuned the unit for emissions, etc. Almost 20% down on power. Same torque, but it's about 20% up on weight, quite a bit more. 18.5 kilograms per kilowatt and 4.75 kilograms per Newton meter. So you can see it's definitely going to be slower. And if I look at the bi-turbo, it's not even got as good power to weight ratio as the bi-turbo. And we also have to remember that because these tyres are draggy and the body's draggy and the stalkers and everything, all of that is going to create drag. So you're not going to get the performance or the fuel efficiency out of the Super Duty that you are out of either of those. Now, of course, when you modify these vehicles, you're going to get the same sort of issues, but probably not as much as the Super Duty. You still have more power here and it'll still be lighter, but nevertheless, if you like speed, then the Super Duty is not the vehicle for you. Ford do, of course, have the Raptor should you want to buy one. Now let's take a look at weights, and this is a core Super Duty strength. So at the front on the V6 XLT, we've got a 1490 kilogram limit, and the actual weight of the vehicle is 1290. That gives us a 200 kilogram margin, which is pretty decent. The GVM is 3218. Remember, GVM on ranges do change depending on what trim level it is. The actual weight is 2280. That gives us a nice 1000 kilogram payload. On the back axle, the limit's 1959, and we've got a 969 margin. Those figures are very good for the ute of its class, and again, considering it's got a tow bar and brake controller built in, which is good. Now, the Super Duty's got a much higher limit on the front, 1900, so that's a lot higher, but it also weighs a lot more. 1620 is the limit, and I'm going to guess that it's got about a 280 margin. Now, I'm going to work on the same percentage ratio front and rear, which is how I came up with that figure. I don't actually have it from Ford. I managed to get on the Weybridge yet, but I think it's going to be about 280 kilogram margin on the front axle. Now, the GVM we do know is 4500, and we do know the, well, I'm guessing the weight because I've had to guess the weight of the tub version because Ford don't have the numbers yet. So I think 1650 payload is what it's going to come out at. On the rear axle, got a massive 2800 limit. I reckon it's going to be about 1570 payload on the back and about 1230 on the rear. So huge differences there. So you can see this is really the reason you buy a Ranger Super Duty. Maybe a bit for off-road, maybe a bit because all the mods are there, but because you want these big, beautiful bits of green just to not worry about payload or weights ever again. You can just switch off from that conversation. The people who run mobile weighing businesses will hate this vehicle because it's going to put them out of business. You buy a Super Duty, it's going to go, yeah, don't worry about it anymore. Okay, now let's take a look at some mods, because remember, what if we modified the V6 XLT? Well, here's the approximate additional weight of all of the modifications, and that the Super Duty has got. It's around about 100 kilograms. So why is the Super Duty that much more heavier? Because it's more than 100 kilos heavier. Well, the answer is because they've reinforced the chassis and they've got to do a whole bunch of other things to the car to make it have a GCM of 8 tons and tow 1,000 kilos more and carry 700 kilograms more. So there's a lot of strengthening that have gone in there, and that's where that comes from. But if you just did those mods, you'd add around 100 kilograms, and then that would eat into your payload. So all included with the Super Duty. Now let's talk a bit about GVM upgrades, because they are very common these days. I've got one in my Ranger, but I do want to make a couple of points about them. And the first thing is, do not take a ute like a Ranger or a Hilux or something like that and try and turn it into a Ram or even a Super Duty or a Canter or Hino. Or just don't. If that's what you want, start with that vehicle and then go for it. I think the way to use these things is for useful headroom. So in my case, for example, my vehicle will spend 99% of its life below its factory GVM. But on those occasions when I've got 4 people in the car and I'm really heavily loaded, going off maybe across the Simpson or something like that, then yeah, I will be over the stock GVM for a little while until that weight comes down again. But that is going to be few and far between. I'm not trying to, you know, create a high capacity vehicle where one doesn't exist, and that's the way I think you've got to use GVM upgrades, kind of useful headroom. Now remember that the heavier you run a car, whether or not it's got a GVM upgrade or whatever else, the more wear and tear you're going to put in it. Things are going to wear out quicker, you're going to use more fuel, you're going to have to replace things you didn't expect to replace. That's just the way weight is in vehicles, regardless of GVM upgrades or anything else. And the Ranger Super Duty should have an advantage there because it's more designed for the weight. And these days, if you're replacing suspension, you may as well get a GVM upgrade if you're going to invest that. Now, one point here is that if you do get something like a GVM upgrade, or even a Ranger Super Duty, I think it would be hard to overload a Ranger Super Duty, but I do know there are people who can do it. There are people running around in trucks like Hinos and Canters and Isuzu NPSs who have overloaded them. So if those people can overload those trucks, which have got 3-4 ton payload, they can overload a Ranger Super Duty. Always manage your weights down to a minimum, even if you've got payload to spare, and that includes the Super Duty. Okay, now let's talk about towing, because this is what this car will be used a lot for. Max brake tow 4.5 tons. I do not recommend ever you go that far. We'll talk about that in a minute. Max tow ball mass 450 kilograms, which is a lot, right? And this is why you need to reinforce the chassis, because 450 kilograms is a lot of weight pressing down. Comes out to about 600 extra on an axle. So GVM is 4500, tear probably about 2580. I think at 4500 kilo tow, if we do the numbers with the GCM, we end up with a payload of around about 650 kilograms, which is pretty much the same actually as an LC 300. So you've got lots and lots of space there. And if you're towing a 4-ton caravan or 3.8 ton caravan or 3500, as you probably more should be, you're going to have even more space to play with, which is great. Now the rear axle limit, you're going to have in the order of 800, 900 kilograms left over on the rear axle, even with 450 kilograms pressing down on it. So again, those numbers are just amazing, absolute magic. And there's the GCM of 8,000 kilograms all up. So yeah, very impressive towing numbers there. So essentially, if you start towing what you would have towed with a GVM upgraded Ranger, your problems go away. You can put 4 people in the vehicle, you can put a canopy, you can put all sorts of stuff in there, and you can still tow your 3.5 ton caravan or 3 ton caravan with no worries at all. You cannot do that with any other comparable ute unless you go up to something like a big Ram. All right, now let's talk a bit about caravans, because I need to add a caution here. So they're the worst. If you set an engineer down and said, build me the worst possible trailer to tow, pretty much come up with a caravan. So first thing, you've got these massive slab sides, very much prone to disturbances by air. Secondly, high centre of gravity, because it's tall and you've got air conditioning, you've got shelves up here, you've got all sorts of stuff. Then you've got a lot of weight right at the front, right at the back, which is absolutely terrible for pitch stability, roll stability and yaw stability, all three. It's generally got a wider track than the tow car, so it doesn't track along in the same indentations in the road, which is also bad. The off-road ones are even worse because they raise the centre of gravity still higher. They totter around on mud tyres with huge, great squirmy blocks, and there's even more weight to deal with. And generally it's a poor design, and the van makers do a difficult job very badly. So for all of those reasons, caravans are the worst types of trailers to tow. So I would say do not tow a 4.5 ton caravan, emphasis on caravan, with a Super Duty. I just don't think it's safe. I've towed 4.5 ton caravans, and I just don't like towing them with anything short of a truck or huge American ute. Because look at it, it's the same wheelbase, and if you're towing 4.5 tons, that thing can't weigh 4.5. It's got to be less, right? It's got to be substantially less, probably maybe 3.8 tons less. So then you've got this 4.5 ton weight here with something which is less than 4.5 tons and only has that standard Ranger wheelbase. That is not a recipe for happy towing, let me tell you. Now, I would only ever tow about 3/4 of maximum tow rating of any vehicle. I think that's a sensible limit. When it comes to plant machinery, that is a different kettle of fish, because all the things which I said were terrible about caravans don't really apply to plant machinery, because you've got you don't have those big slab sides, you've got the weight nice and central over the axle, the centre of gravity is a lot lower down, etc, etc. So I'd be much more inclined to tow 4.5 tons with a Ranger Super Duty, but I wouldn't tow 4.5 tons if it was in the shape of a caravan. So I want to make that point absolutely clear. I would use big American utes, because here's a scale model. So look at that. I mean, look at the difference in wheelbase, and that's a big contributor to pitch stability and therefore roll and yaw stability as well. It's heavier. I mean, this thing is probably weighing maybe 3.5 tons to begin with, then you add weight onto it, so it's heavier than either of those. So that's the sort of vehicle you want, a Silverado, Ram 3500, if you're going to tow a giant size caravan, even if the Super Duty's got the numbers for it. So remember, wheelbase, weight and overhang. The relative overhang there is quite short relative to the wheelbase, long wheelbase, short overhang, unlike the Rangers. Now let's talk about ground clearance, because again, Ford have got this wrong. It's not the first time they've got it wrong, it's about the fourth time, and they join everyone else, Toyota, Ineos, Nissan, pretty much every manufacturer gets this wrong. Why? I don't know if they do it deliberately or not, who knows. Obviously don't read enough of my articles. Anyway, they claim it's got 299mm ground clearance, and that's not right, and this is why. So this is the effect of taller tyres, right? So we've got vehicle over here. All I've done here is I've increased the tyres. You can see that the ground clearance has gone up, just made the tyres taller. That is it. Now the Ranger ground clearance is 230mm underneath the diff. All right, measured mine, it's about 230mm. I've got slightly taller tyres on it, but so it's, even then it's probably made 225, 210 compared to the original vehicle. We'll call it 230 to be generous though. Now that's with 31-inch tyres. The Super Duty has 33-inch tyres, which is an equivalent diameter increase of around 50mm. Now we halve that to get the ground clearance increase, so that's 25mm, and then we add 230 to 25, we come up with 255mm. So that should be the new ground clearance, not 299. But Ford also say it's got the biggest differential they've ever fitted to a Ranger, as it should, because it's got the biggest job to do. Now, big differential means big size, and that means a reduction in ground clearance. So I reckon it's probably at best 15mm increase over the standard, which would probably make it 240mm, 250 an absolute top. I can't really see it being more than that. So how is this wrong? Well, Ford are confusing running clearance with ground clearance, and the two are not the same. They even say running ground clearance. That's not a thing. Running ground clearance does not exist. It's running clearance or it's ground clearance. What we're interested in is ground clearance, not running clearance. No one cares about ground clearance. We care about what we can drive over. So ignore this 299mm rubbish. And remember, suspension lifts do not increase the ground clearance on live axled vehicles, and it has a live axle at the back, so you can put as tall springs in as you want. It doesn't change the distance from the diff to the ground. It does on an independent suspension vehicle, as I will show you here. So remember, if those springs were taller, that distance remains the same, but as these springs get taller, that distance will start to increase. So independent suspension vehicles do have a ground clearance advantage. Now, a couple of other points over here. Where are the locker switches? I've zoomed into this photograph. I do not see a locker switch down here, and I want to know where it is. On the Ranger PHEV, they put the locker and hill descent control on the touchscreen, which in my view is a mortal sin. Absolutely mortal sin. We're trying to get away from touchscreens, back to physical buttons, particularly for off-road controls, which you might need to stab in a hurry when your hands are cold and gloves in them or whatever else there. So it's nuts to put any of these controls onto the screen. They need to be physical buttons. Can't stress that enough. And I was very disappointed to see that in the PHEV Ranger, and I'd be really disappointed to see any such controls on the touchscreen here, but hopefully I'm wrong, it does happen. Okay, some other points here. Now that's where the point is for your device holder, and that is again I think off the base model, but it's got split cycle climate control, whereas the base model, the XL, doesn't have that. It's only just single. So let's do some buying advice versus the standard Ranger. So why would you buy a Super Duty over the standard one? Well, payload and tow, that's your primary reasons. You just want those weight numbers. That is the number one reason. Two, off-road, it will be better off-road, but I think for most people the difference won't be significant enough, particularly once you put slightly taller tyres on the standard Ranger suspension lift and a front lock, in which case I would suggest there'd be very few places that Super Duty is going to go that other Ranger couldn't follow, bearing in mind those comments about modifications, etc. So I think that's a secondary reason. A huge reason is standard mods are warranted. If you don't enjoy the process of figuring out which modifications you want, going into a shop and having it all fitted, you don't have to worry about it. Just turn up at your Ford dealership and go, I want a Super Duty, and it's all there for you. And I think that's just absolutely huge. A lot of Ineos owners really appreciate that about the vehicles as well. And then there's some SD features, Super Duty features, you know, like the scales, some interior features as well, like the device holder. Some of them are going to be really cool. So I think all of these are reasons to buy the Super Duty. But I would default to the Ranger unless you need those Super Duty capabilities, because it's cheaper, frankly. But not only that, probably the cost. It's slower. It's not going to go as fast. You're not going to get up to those wild track platinum type trim levels in this thing, if that makes a difference to you. And the fuel consumption is going to be high as well. So if all you do is tow your boat down to the boat ramp, why do you need your Ranger Super Duty if your standard Ranger can do it? Right? So those are your pros and cons. So let's say you're kitting out a Super Duty for four-wheel drive touring. What might you need to buy? Because it doesn't actually include everything. UHF radio, a dual battery, towing mirrors, so there are a factory fit option for Ford with clear views. Rock sliders, that is actually a factory option as well. An air compressor, you might want to add one of those. A winch, I'm not sure that's a winch compatible bull bar, I don't think it is. Driving lights, a roof rack, and you're going to need something to go on the back. And that's the thing about utes, right? Compared to a wagon, a big expense for a ute is what you put on the back, because that is not going to be good enough for many recreational users. It offers no weather protection, and it offers no theft protection, no dustproof protection. So you're going to want to put a service body on it, or the tub, and add a canopy or a lid or something like that. All of that is going to be extra cost beyond what Ford are advertising at the moment, but it gives you more capability. So bear that in mind as well. You will need to budget to sort the back out. Now let's compare the Super Duty to the big USA utes. In advantage, it is going to be better off-road, there's no question about that. These are not great off-road. Wheelbase, traction aids, they're just not wonderful. The Super Duty absolutely will be. Lots of accessories available. You don't necessarily get them all for these big trucks. Safety, I think it will probably inherit the same sort of safety features, if not the actual rating from the other Rangers, better than these trucks. Payload, these American trucks, sometimes their payload is really terrible, unless you get something like a Ram 3500, but payload is going to be an absolute strength of the Super Duty. All-wheel drive, often these are two-wheel drive, which is annoying. Ranger's going to be, Super Duty is going to be all-wheel drive, and diesel. These trucks are increasingly petrol only. Now, on the other hand, the USA utes are going to offer you gobs of power, just amazing. The Super Duty is not going to offer you lots and lots of power. It's not going to be as powerful. It's going to be slower than the 2-litre Rangers. On-road, I think that these will do on-road very well. They offer petrol, cabin size. Now, if you look in the back seat of these, the Ranger back seat isn't bad, but these things dwarf it. I mean, just the leg room, the width, everything else, just amazing. Tub size, huge is going to be as well. And just luxury items, some of the luxury features in there, really impressive. And Super Duty is not going to be able to match that. So each to their own for that one. And compared to the Raptor, well, clear payload, towing, diesel range. I think the Raptor will have the goods off-road. It will be lighter. It's still got the front and rear lockers. It's got a better suspension, probably got a bit more of a lift. So there's not going to be much in it, to be honest. On-road, it's going to kill it because you're going to actually have some power and you've got the handling there. Speed, and luxury features as well. So I think that's the difference between those two. Now, my own personal story, to maybe give a bit of context to this. So both of these are my car. In fact, they're actually the same car. So that's as I bought it, and that's as it is now. So I bought one which was ex-dealer demo, had close to 10,000 Ks on the clock, and that saved me many thousands of dollars on the buy price, which I was very pleased about, and that's how I was able to afford it, because I wasn't going to get a new one. I transformed it into this. So here's the question, why didn't I wait and buy a Super Duty? Well, here's the reasons. One is cost, simple as that, right? I suspected, and I've been proven right, that the Super Duty is way more expensive than even remotely trying to do the same thing with a V6 XLT. And my total build, including the service body and everything else, is going to be less than the drive-away cost of a Super Duty tub variant, even the tray variant. And remember, even if I bought a Super Duty, I've still got a bunch of things to do to it on top of that buy price. Two, timing. I didn't want to wait till 26, 27, and then for them to become dealer demo affordable for me. I wasn't going to wait that long. Third thing, I actually don't need 4.5 tons of tow. Right? My tow requirement is generally under 2.5. Sometimes I go to 3 with my car trail and a few other things, so I do need above 3, but I don't need that amount. And similarly, a payload of 1,000 kilograms is actually enough for me. Now I've got a GVM upgrade for those times when I'm a little bit over, but actually I kind of don't need the extra capability for what I need. I try and travel as light as I can. And I like kilowatts is the other thing. But I absolutely love the Super Duty, don't get me wrong about that. And I'm so happy it's in the market. I think it's going to solve problems for a lot of people. And I absolutely commend and applaud Ford for bringing it to market. Now, if I won Lotto, I would definitely buy a Super Duty, not in that colour, I'd get it Raptor orange of course, and I'd buy a Raptor as well because I do like the idea of a Raptor. But for the moment, I think I'm happy with my V6 XLT, and I hope by watching this video, you have started to understand what the Super Duty is, its pros and cons, and it's helped you in some way. Thanks for watching. Any questions, please use the comment section.